Ambassador Zeklort stepped out of the sleek shuttle onto Earth soil for the first time. The gravity pulled at his slender frame, making each step feel like a struggle. His 4 eyes blinked rapidly, adjusting to the harsh sunlight that humans seemed to enjoy. The air felt thick and wet in his breathing chambers. "Welcome to Earth, Ambassador," said a human female, stepping forward with her hand extended. "I'm Commander Susan Miller, your liaison during your stay here." Zeklort tried to remember the human greeting ritual. After a moment of hesitation, he extended his upper right limb and allowed the human to grasp it briefly. The touch sent a small shiver of discomfort through him, but he maintained his diplomatic poise. "Thank you, Commander Miller. The Galactic Conclave is pleased to establish formal relations with your species," he said, his translator device converting his musical clicks into human English. Susan smiled and gestured toward a building in the distance. "We've prepared quarters for you in the diplomatic compound. Your biological requirements have been accommodated as best we could. Please let me know if anything isn't suitable." Zeklort nodded, his head crest rising slightly in appreciation. As they walked toward the compound, he consulted his datapad. "Your planet has been classified as a Class 12 death world in our preliminary surveys. I must admit I was surprised when the Conclave selected me for this mission." Susan looked puzzled. "Death world? That seems a bit dramatic." "Not at all. Your atmospheric oxygen levels alone would be toxic to most sentient species. Add to that your gravity, temperature variations, radiation levels, and biological hazards." Zeklort waved his secondary limbs in a gesture of disbelief. "Most species in the Conclave evolved on worlds with far more stable conditions. I guess. We're just used to it," Susan replied with a shrug. "Earth is home." They entered the compound, a series of low buildings surrounded by carefully maintained gardens. Zeklort noticed with approval that a section had been modified with plants that produced less oxygen. Perhaps humans were more considerate than initial reports suggested. "Your quarters are this way," Susan said, leading him down a corridor. "We've scheduled a welcome dinner tonight with some key diplomatic personnel. Nothing too formal, just a chance to get acquainted before official meetings begin tomorrow." Zeklort was about to respond when the floor beneath them suddenly trembled. The tremor was slight at first, then grew in intensity. Pictures rattled on walls. A vase fell from a shelf and shattered. "What is happening?" Zeklort cried, his voice rising to a panicked pitch. His protective membrane automatically deployed, covering his body in a thin, translucent shield. Instead of answering, Susan grabbed his upper limb and pulled him under a nearby doorway. "Stay here," she ordered calmly. Around them, humans were moving with purpose but without panic. Some ducked under furniture, others stood in doorways like Susan. The shaking continued for what Zeklort's internal clock registered as 42 seconds. To him, it felt like hours. When it finally stopped, he remained frozen in place, his membrane still fully deployed. "You can come out now," Susan said gently. "It's over." "What? What was that?" Zeklort managed to ask as his membrane slowly retracted. "Just an earthquake," Susan replied, already checking her communication device. "Looks like it was about a 5.2 on the Richter scale. Not too bad." "Not too bad?" Zeklort's voice rose again. "The ground moved. The planet itself attacked us." Susan laughed, then quickly composed herself when she saw his distress was genuine. "I apologize, Ambassador. I forget that not everyone is used to tectonic activity. We get these fairly regularly in California. It's just part of life here." "Regular? Attacks from the planet itself are just part of life?" Zeklort could not keep the disbelief from his voice. Susan began walking again, gesturing for him to follow. "They're not attacks, just natural events. The Earth's crust is divided into plates that move against each other. Sometimes energy builds up and is released as an earthquake. We build our structures to withstand them and have protocols for safety." Zeklort followed her, still shaken. As they walked, he noticed humans already cleaning up fallen items, checking for damage, and continuing their duties as if nothing significant had happened. "Please, I need to send a report to the Conclave immediately," he said. "Of course. There's a secure communication station in your quarters," Susan said. "Though I'm not sure what you'll report, nothing really happened." When they reached his quarters, Zucklord thanked Susan and quickly sealed the door. The room had been modified to match the atmospheric conditions of his homeworld, and he gratefully took deep breaths of the thinner air. He activated his communication device and began recording. Emergency report to the Galactic Conclave, 1st, Contact Division. Ambassador Zucklord reporting from Earth. Initial classification of Earth as a Class 12 death world is confirmed. Within minutes of my arrival, the planet experienced what humans call an earthquake, a violent movement of the planetary crust that causes structures to shake and potentially collapse. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Most concerning is the human reaction to this event. Commander Susan Miller, my assigned liaison, described the potentially fatal planetary convulsion as not too bad and just part of life. I witnessed humans continuing their activities with minimal disruption. Zucklord's crest flattened against his head in distress. I believe we may have severely underestimated the psychological differences between humans and conclave species. These beings have adapted not just physically, but mentally to constant mortal danger. They appear to simply accept conditions that would drive most sentient species to madness. He looked out the window at the blue sky, so different from the gentle purple of his homeworld. I recommend immediate review of our diplomatic approach. These humans do not merely survive on a death world, they consider it normal. I fear what this might mean for future relations. What other deadly conditions might they consider unremarkable? What dangers might they inadvertently expose us to, simply because they no longer recognize them as threats? Zucklord ended the recording and sent it through the secure channel to the conclave. Then he sat on the specially designed rest platform and tried to calm himself. Tomorrow he would meet more humans and begin formal diplomatic talks. Tonight, he would try to reconcile himself to the fact that the very ground beneath him might try to kill him at any moment and that his hosts would barely notice. The next morning, Zucklord woke to the sound of rain hitting his window. He moved carefully to look outside. Water fell from the sky in sheets, pounding against the building and flooding the walkways. On his homeworld, precipitation was gentle and rare. This looked like an assault. A chime at his door announced Susan's arrival. She entered, shaking water from her coat and smiling brightly. "Good morning, Ambassador. Sleep well after all the excitement yesterday?" Zucklord gestured to the window. "Is this normal too, this water attack?" Susan laughed. "That's just a spring shower. It'll clear up by afternoon." She checked her device. "Change of plans today. The diplomatic meetings are postponed until tomorrow. I thought instead you might like to experience some everyday human life. My family has invited us to spend the day at my home." Zucklord hesitated. The compound was frightening enough, but a human dwelling? Still, he had been sent to learn about these creatures. "That would be educational," he said finally. They traveled in a ground vehicle Susan called a car. Zucklord clutched the seat as they moved at terrifying speeds along crowded roads. 70 miles per hour is the limit on this highway," Susan explained casually. "Some people go faster, but I try to obey traffic laws." Zucklord did not respond. His internal calculations told him that a collision at this speed would be fatal for most life forms. Yet humans packed themselves into these metal boxes and hurled themselves across their planet every day. They arrived at a modest structure in what Susan called a suburb. A tall human male waited at the entrance, along with 2 smaller humans that Zucklord recognized as juveniles. "Ambassador, this is my husband, Greg Wilson," Susan said. "And these are our children, Samantha and Kyle." Greg extended his hand. "Welcome to our home, Ambassador. Susan's told us a lot about you." The children stared with open curiosity. The female, Samantha, appeared to be in early adolescence. The male, Kyle, was younger. "You're really from another planet?" Kyle asked. "Cool, do you have superpowers? Can your species breathe fire?" "Kyle," Susan warned, "remember our talk about respecting other cultures." "It is fine," Zucklord said. "No, young human. My species cannot breathe fire. That would be extremely dangerous." Greg laughed. "Come on inside. I've just made lunch." The interior of the dwelling was warm and filled with objects Zucklord couldn't identify. The humans led him to an eating area and served food. Sci-Fi had brought his own nutrition packets but observed the humans consuming their meal with interest. "So," Greg said between bites, "how are you finding Earth so far?" "It is overwhelming," Sci-Fi admitted. "Yesterday, the ground shook violently, and today water falls from the sky with enough force to damage unprotected tissue. Yet you all seem unconcerned." Greg nodded. "I guess it must seem strange. We're just used to it." "What do you do in your profession?" Sci-Fi asked, trying to steer the conversation to safer topics. "I'm a firefighter," Greg said. "Just got back from a big wildfire up north. 3 days on the line." Sci-Fi's translator must have malfunctioned. "You fight fire? Deliberately?" "Someone has to," Greg said with a shrug. He pulled out his communication device and showed images to Sci-Fi. The alien's 4 eyes widened at scenes of massive flames consuming trees while tiny human figures worked nearby. "You were this close to an uncontrolled combustion event by choice?" "It's my job," Greg said. "Been doing it for 15 years. After the meal, the children asked if Sci-Fi would watch them outside. Susan encouraged him, saying it would be fun. In the area behind the house, Kyle removed a wheeled board from a storage unit. "Watch this," he called. He placed the board at the top of the dwelling's sloped entry path, stepped onto it, and launched himself downward. Sci-Fi's protective membrane deployed automatically as he watched in horror. The child was accelerating down the slope with no protective equipment except a small helmet. If he fell, Kyle reached the bottom and turned the board using his body weight, coming to a stop with a flourish. "Did you see that? I've been practicing that kick turn for weeks. Very impressive," Sci-Fi managed to say as his membrane slowly retracted. "Is this activity common for human young?" "Oh yeah," Samantha said. "That's nothing. Look what I can do." She retrieved a 2-wheeled device from the storage unit, put on a helmet, and pedaled rapidly down the same slope. At the bottom, she pulled up on the front wheel and jumped a small constructed ramp, becoming completely airborne before landing and continuing her ride. Kaylort's membrane deployed again. "Do your parents know you do this?" he asked when she returned. Samantha laughed. "Mom taught me how to jump. She used to race mountain bikes in college. Dad was worried at first, but he came around." That evening, after the children had gone to their sleeping quarters, Sci-Fi sat with Susan and Greg in their living area. His limbs still trembled slightly from the day's revelations. "I must thank you for your hospitality," he said. "I have learned much about human life today." "Happy to help," Greg said. "Any questions we can answer for you?" Sci-Fi hesitated, then decided direct inquiry was best. "Your offspring engage in activities that have high probability of causing physical harm. You yourself, Greg, voluntarily approach deadly fire. Yesterday the ground shook violently and everyone acted as if this was routine. How do you live this way? Are humans unable to perceive danger?" Susan and Greg exchanged glances. Finally, Susan spoke. "We perceive danger just fine, Ambassador. We've just learned to assess and manage risks. Life contains hazards everywhere, even on your world, I imagine. We choose not to hide from them. On my world, we design systems to eliminate risk," Sci-Fi said. "Here, you seem to embrace it." Greg nodded. "There's a saying, a ship in harbor is safe, but that is not what ships are built for. We believe in living fully, even if that means facing some dangers." Later, in the guest sleeping area, Sci-Fi recorded another message to the conclave. "After observing a human family unit, I must update my assessment. Humans do not merely tolerate danger, they actively seek it. Their young practice falling, from wheeled devices at high speeds as recreation. Their adults willingly enter burning areas. They traverse their planet in fast-moving metal containers." He paused, his crest rising and falling in agitation. "Most concerning is their philosophy. They believe avoiding all risk leads to an unfulfilled existence. They choose potential harm over what they see as guaranteed stagnation." Sci-Fi looked out the window at the alien night sky. I wonder if this is why they advance so quickly as a species. While the Conclave carefully plans each step forward over decades, humans leap into the unknown daily. Their individual lives are shorter and more dangerous than ours, but their collective progress is startlingly rapid. He ended the recording and prepared for sleep, wondering what new horrors, or wonders, tomorrow might bring. The next morning, Zekalort learned that today's schedule included a visit to the International Orbital Platform. Humans had built a massive structure that circled their planet, and Ambassador Zekalort was invited to see it. "We'll take a shuttle. Up," Susan explained as they drove to a large complex with many buildings. "The ride takes about 2 hours." "You mean we will leave the planet's surface?" Zekalort asked, his voice rising slightly. "Yes, that's generally how you get to orbit," Susan replied with a smile. "Don't worry, we've been doing this for decades. It's routine now." Zekalort had traveled through space before, of course. The Conclave had perfected safe space travel centuries ago, but he had reviewed human spacecraft designs. They were primitive, in comparison, using chemical propellants and minimal shielding. At the launch facility, Susan introduced him to the pilot, Captain Lily Carter. She was a small human female with short hair and a confident manner. "First time in one of our ships?" Captain Carter asked. "Don't worry. I've done this run hundreds of times. Smooth as silk." The shuttle itself was smaller than Zekalort expected. He was led to a padded seat and strapped in with multiple restraints. The other passengers, mostly human scientists and engineers, chatted, casually as if they were not about to be blasted off their planet on top of controlled explosions. "Is this safe?" Zekalort whispered to Susan. "Statistically, it's safer than the car ride here," she said, checking her own restraints. "There's a 99.97% success rate on these orbital shuttles." Zekalort's 4 eyes blinked rapidly. "What happens in the other 0.03% of cases?" Susan just patted his upper limb reassuringly as the engines began to rumble. The launch was, to Zekalort, pure terror. The crushing force of acceleration, the vibration, the roaring of the engines, all of it triggered every danger response in his body. His protective membrane stayed fully deployed until they reached orbit, and the engines cut off. As weightlessness took over, the humans unstrapped and began moving about the cabin with practiced ease. Zekalort remained firmly in his seat, his limbs clutching the armrests. "First time in 0G?" asked a young human male floating nearby. His name tag read, "Alan Ray is engineer?" "No," Zekalort replied stiffly. "The Conclave has artificial gravity nullification, but we use it sparingly. It has negative health effects on most species." Alan grinned. "We get space sickness too, but you adapt. Here." He offered a small tablet. "Anti-nausea medication. Works for most species." After taking the medication, Zekalort felt slightly better. He managed to unstrap himself and cautiously pushed away from his seat. His body drifted upward, and he had to suppress a surge of panic. "Use the handrails," Susan suggested, demonstrating how to pull herself along. Through the shuttle's windows, Zekalort could see the curve of Earth below. It was beautiful and terrifying, a swirl of blue, white, and green, so much water, so many extreme environments. The International Orbital Platform came into view gradually, a sprawling structure of modules, solar panels, and docking ports. Compared to Conclave space stations, it looked fragile and haphazard, as if it had been built in pieces without an overall plan. "Home sweet home," Captain Carter announced. "Preparing for docking procedures." The docking went smoothly, and soon, they were floating through a hatch into the station. They were greeted by the station commander, a tall human female named Olivia Wright. "Welcome aboard, Ambassador," Commander Wright said. "We're honored to have the first representative of the Galactic Conclave visit our humble station." Zekalort tried to focus on diplomacy rather than his unease. "The honor is mine, Commander. Your species has accomplished much in a short time." The tour began immediately. The station was cramped by Conclave standards, with narrow corridors and small living quarters. Humans moved about in all directions, some working upside down relative to others, using the lack of gravity to maximize the use of space. In the research section, Scientists were conducting experiments that made Zeklort's crest flatten in alarm, studying radiation effects, testing materials in vacuum conditions, even cultivating microorganisms from extreme Earth environments. And here's our warning. System for space debris, Alan explained, showing a complex tracking display. We monitor thousands of objects from old satellites to tiny fragments. As if on cue, an alarm sounded. Red lights flashed and a computerized voice announced, "Debris alert. Potential impact in Sector 7. All personnel follow standard protocols." The humans around Zeklort immediately began moving with purpose. Some secured equipment, others headed to designated areas. There was no panic, just efficient action. "What's happening?" Zeklort asked, his membrane deploying automatically. "Small debris field," Susan explained, guiding him toward a more reinforced section of the station. "Probably from that old satellite. That broke up last month. The station will adjust its position to avoid the larger pieces, but some smaller ones might hit us." "Hit us?" Zeklort repeated in horror. "Objects moving at orbital velocity can penetrate hull materials. That's why we have multiple hull layers and emergency protocols," Commander Wright said calmly, joining them. "We take shelter in reinforced sections during these events. Happens every few months." They waited in a small room with thick walls. Zeklort could hear occasional pings against the station's exterior. Each sound made him flinch. "Those are just tiny particles," Alan explained. "The biggest pieces were tracked and avoided. The medium-sized ones are stopped by our outer shields." "You live like this?" Zeklort asked. "Constantly under threat from high-velocity impacts?" "It's just part of operating in low Earth orbit," Commander Wright said. "Space is dangerous. We respect that and prepare for it." After 20 minutes, the all-clear sounded. The tour continued as if nothing significant had happened. Later, in an observation module with a large window overlooking Earth, Alan offered to take Zeklort on a spacewalk. "A what?" the ambassador asked, certain he had misheard. "A spacewalk. You know, go outside the station in a suit. The view is amazing." "You voluntarily exit the station? Into the vacuum?" Alan nodded. "Sure. We do regular maintenance that way. It's perfectly safe with the right equipment." Zeklort declined as politely as possible. That night, in the small quarters assigned to him, Zeklort recorded another message to the Conclave. "These humans live in space much as they do on their death world. They acknowledge the dangers but face them with preparation rather than fear. Their orbital habitat is regularly bombarded with debris, yet they consider this normal. They voluntarily exit their station protected only by thin suits." He paused, watching Earth through his window. "I am beginning to understand that what defines humans is not recklessness, but a unique form of courage. They do not ignore dangers, they simply refuse to be limited by them. Where a conclave species would create elaborate systems to eliminate a risk entirely, humans accept a small level of risk as the price of progress." Zeklort's crest rose slightly in reluctant admiration. "I must admit, their approach has advantages. While it leads to individual tragedies, it also allows for rapid advancement and adaptation. In the time it would take a conclave committee to study the safety of a new environment, humans have already built a settlement there, learned from their mistakes, and moved on to greater challenges." He closed the recording and prepared for sleep, wondering what other human behaviors might shock him tomorrow. After returning to Earth from the space station, Zeklort was scheduled to attend a high-level diplomatic meeting. Representatives from major human governments would be present to discuss potential trade agreements with the Galactic Conclave. Millardir meeting was held in a large building with many windows. Zeklort found himself seated at a long table with Susan beside him. Humans in formal clothing talked about resources, technology sharing, and security concerns. Despite his experiences so far, Zeklort felt almost comfortable. This at least was familiar. The careful dance of diplomacy happened the same way across the galaxy. During a break in the talks, Zeklort stepped into a side room with Susan to review some data on his pad. Suddenly, a new alarm sounded, different from the earthquake warning he had heard on his first day. "What is it now?" he asked, his membrane half deploying in anticipation of danger. Susan checked her device. her expression changing from calm to concerned. Chemical detection system. Something's leaking in the building's west wing. We need to evacuate. Throughout the building, humans moved quickly but orderly toward exits. Zoclort followed Susan, noticing how even in this situation, the humans maintained control. No screaming, no pushing, just efficient movement. Outside, in what humans called a parking lot, groups gathered at designated meeting points. Zoclort noticed Susan looking worried as she checked her device and spoke with other officials. "What's happening?" he asked. "3 delegates are missing," she explained. "They were in conference room B, which is near where the chemical leak was detected. The room might be sealed off by the automatic safety systems." A human male in a uniform approached them. "Commander Miller, the building's containment system activated. Those delegates are trapped. We've called emergency services, but they're 20 minutes out." Susan frowned. "Those chemicals are corrosive. 20 minutes could mean serious injury. The safety protocols are clear," the uniformed human said. "We wait for the hazmat team." Zoclort watched Susan's face. He had learned to read human expressions over the past days, and he saw something change in her eyes, a decision being made. "I know the override codes for the safety doors," she said. "And there are emergency breathing masks in the security office. I'm going back in." "That would violate all safety protocols," the man protested. "Those people need help now," Susan insisted. She turned to another human nearby. "Diane, you've had hazmat training, right?" A dark-haired woman nodded. "Basic course last year. I'll come with you." Before Zoclort could process what was happening, Susan and Diane had retrieved breathing masks from a nearby security office and were heading back toward the building. He watched in horror as they disappeared inside. "They're going into a contaminated area? Voluntarily?" he asked the uniformed man. "Against orders," the man said, looking both angry and worried. "But that's Susan for you. Never leaves anyone behind." 15 tense minutes passed. Zoclort's membrane repeatedly deployed and retracted as his anxiety levels fluctuated. Finally, the building's doors opened. Susan and Diane emerged, supporting 3 coughing humans between them. Medical personnel rushed forward. Zoclort noticed that Susan's arms had red, irritated patches where the chemical had made contact with her skin. Diane had similar marks on her face. After the injured delegates were taken away in wheeled medical units, Susan was treated by a human doctor who applied a cream to her chemical burns. "You should have waited for the hazmat team," the doctor scolded, but without much force behind the words. "They were having trouble breathing in there, Nancy," Susan replied. "We couldn't wait." The doctor, Nancy, shook her head. "At least these burns aren't as bad as that time in Costa Rica. Remember that?" Susan laughed. "How could I forget? 2 weeks in a hospital bed with jungle fever and 3rd-degree burns. Still have the scars on my back." "Worth it, though," Nancy said, finishing the treatment. "You saved those researchers and their data." Zoclort listened to this exchange with growing disbelief. They were casually discussing previous serious injuries as if they were minor inconveniences. "You have experienced severe burns before?" he asked Susan when the doctor moved away. "A research station caught fire when I was there on a diplomatic mission," she explained. "Nothing diplomatic about crawling through flames, but someone had to do it." "Did you not fear permanent damage? Death?" Susan considered this. "Sure, I was scared, but fear isn't always a reason to stop. Sometimes it's just information you note while you do what needs to be done anyway." Later that evening, Zoclort sat in his quarters, thinking about what he had seen. He accessed the Human Information Network and searched for historical records of human responses to danger. What he found both disturbed and fascinated him. Humans had endured ice ages with primitive tools. They had survived plagues that killed millions. They had fought wars with increasingly deadly weapons. Throughout their history, individual humans had voluntarily faced death to save others, to explore unknown territories, to test new technologies. Yet somehow they had not just survived but thrived. Their population had grown, their technology had advanced, and now they were reaching out to the stars. Calort began his nightly report to the conclave. Today I witnessed 2 humans deliberately enter a chemically contaminated area to rescue others. They suffered injuries that they dismissed as minor. In conversation afterward, they referenced previous, more severe injuries with what appeared to be pride rather than trauma. He paused, organizing his thoughts. I have studied human history. These are not isolated incidents or the actions of abnormal individuals. Throughout their development, humans have repeatedly chosen to face deadly conditions for various reasons: to save others, to gain knowledge, to test their own limits. His crest rose and fell as he considered the implications. No longer believe humans are defective in their risk assessment. Instead, they operate under a different value system. Where conclave species prioritize safety and longevity above all, humans include other factors in their calculations: the welfare of their group, the advancement of knowledge, even abstract concepts like courage and duty. Sklort looked out his window at the night sky, thinking of the vast difference between his world and this dangerous planet. I wonder now if our initial classification of Earth as a death world is too simplistic. Perhaps what we should study is not how humans survive here, but how this environment has shaped them into what they are: a species that sees obstacles not as warnings to retreat, but as challenges to overcome. 3 weeks into his stay on Earth, Sklort had begun to adjust to the constant state of low-level anxiety that came with living on a death world. He still flinched at loud noises and deployed his protective membrane when startled, but he could now ride in a car without gripping the seat in terror. This morning, Susan had informed him of a special briefing. The humans' weather control systems, which were far less advanced than those of the conclave, had detected a major solar storm approaching Earth. The planet's magnetic field would offer some protection, but there would likely be disruptions to power and communications. We'll be meeting in the main conference room, Susan explained as they walked through the diplomatic compound. The storm is expected to hit in about 12 hours. We need to go over emergency protocols. Sklort noticed that the humans seemed more serious than usual, but still not truly alarmed. When they entered the conference room, screens displayed images of the sun ejecting a massive cloud of charged particles directly toward Earth. Commander Wright from the space station was present via video link. We've already moved the station to a more shielded position and powered down non-essential systems, she reported. All spacewalks are canceled until further notice. A human male with gray hair stood at the front of the room. I'm Dr. Paul Davis, director of the Solar Warning System, he introduced himself. This is going to be the largest solar event we've recorded in the last 50 years. We expect significant impacts. He showed more images and data that made Sklort's crest flatten against his head. The humans were talking about radiation levels that could harm unshielded electronics, magnetic fluctuations that could disrupt power grids, and atmospheric effects that could interfere with communications. Your star is attacking your planet, Sklort said quietly to Susan, and yet everyone seems so calm. We've been through this before, she replied. It's disruptive, but we have procedures in place. The briefing continued with detailed plans for protecting key infrastructure, maintaining emergency services, and ensuring public safety. Various officials reported on their preparations. It was all very organized, very practical. When the meeting ended, Susan turned to Sklort. The compound has good shielding, but my family has invited us to wait out the storm at their home. They have a specially prepared basement. Greg thinks it would be educational for you. Sklort thought about declining, but his curiosity won out. I would be interested to see how a human family prepares for such an event. At Susan's home, Greg was checking supplies in a reinforced basement room. The children were helping, seemingly treating the whole thing as an adventure rather than a potential crisis. We've got water, food, first aid supplies, backup power, and communication equipment, Greg explained, plus games and books to pass the time if we lose power. You've done this before? Sklort asked. A few times, Greg said, though this storm looks bigger than usual. But we're ready. As the hours passed, news updates showed the storm's approach. Sklort was impressed by the calm, organized response from human authorities. There was no panic in the streets, just people following instructions and making preparations. That evening, as the first effects of the storm began to hit, The family gathered in the basement room. The power flickered but stayed on thanks to the backup systems Greg had installed. "Now we wait," Susan said, settling into a comfortable chair. The children were already playing a board game on a small table. Kalort sat in a corner, observing. After some time, he finally asked the question that had been growing in his mind for weeks. "Susan, how do you do it? How do you live like this?" "Like what?" she asked. "Always on the edge of disaster. Your planet shakes. Your weather turns violent. Your star itself attacks you with radiation. Yet you build your homes here, raise your young here, and act as if it's all normal." Susan thought for a moment. "Because for us it is normal. This is our home. These are the conditions we evolved in. But you understand the dangers better than your ancestors did," Kalort pressed. "You have the science to measure exactly how deadly your environment is. Why not change it? The Conclave has technology that could stabilize your tectonic plates, regulate your weather patterns, even provide better shielding from solar radiation." Greg joined the conversation. "And lose who we are in the process?" "What do you mean?" Kalort asked. "We are who we are because of this planet," Greg explained. "The challenges it presents have shaped us, forced us to adapt, to innovate, to cooperate. If we removed all danger, all difficulty, would we still be human?" "My species altered our homeworld centuries ago," Kalort said. "We removed dangers, stabilized systems. We live much longer, safer lives as a result." "And how long has it been since your people tried something truly new?" Susan asked gently. "How long since you took a real risk for potential gain?" Kalort's crest flattened in surprise. It was true. The Conclave advanced slowly, carefully, with exhaustive testing and planning. Major technological changes happened, over generations, not years. "We built our civilization on risk management," Kalort said finally. "You built yours on risk tolerance." "More than tolerance," Susan corrected. "Engagement. We don't just accept danger, we learn from it. Each disaster teaches us something. Each challenge forces growth." The lights flickered again as the solar storm intensified outside. None of the humans even looked up. "We're not fearless," Greg added. "We feel fear just like any species. But we've learned that fear is just information, not a command. Sometimes the right choice is to heed it and retreat. Sometimes the right choice is to acknowledge it and continue anyway." Kalort looked at the human family, Susan reading reports on her device, Greg checking the backup systems, the children absorbed in their game. They knew a dangerous, astronomical event was happening outside. They had taken reasonable precautions. And now they simply lived their lives, neither ignoring the danger nor being paralyzed by it. For the first time, Kalort felt something beyond shock or horror when confronting Earth's dangers. He felt a flicker of what might be admiration. Later, that night, as the storm raged outside, Kalort recorded his final report to the Conclave before his scheduled return. "After observing humans for nearly a month, I must recommend a complete reassessment of our understanding of this species. What we classified as a dangerous death world has produced beings who transform danger into opportunity, who use fear as a tool rather than a limitation." He paused, organizing his thoughts carefully. "Humans do not see extreme danger as extraordinary because they have incorporated it into their definition of ordinary life. This is not a defect in their psychology. It is perhaps their greatest strength. While individually fragile, collectively they display a resilience and adaptability that the Conclave would be wise to study further." Kalort looked around at the human family that had welcomed him, showing him their world with all its terrors and wonders. "As we consider future relations with humans, we should remember this. They don't merely survive on their death world, they belong to it. And if they ever leave it in significant numbers, they will carry its lessons with them to the stars. The galaxy may never be the same."